one of the things that I think is indicative of how poorly we failed, not just in terms of, deaths relative to what could have been for similarly situated, at least on paper, as it were, countries. But is there another country in the world that is less prepared for the next one than the U.S.? I mean,
Yes.
it feels like if something was, I mean, we saw this even in when Biden got into office. The numbers in Biden's first year of deaths were higher than in Trump's year of being president, despite the fact that we had more people vaccinated. Because and the evidence is that if you're vaccinated, you have like something like 10 times less of a chance of getting of dying. But we had gotten rid of we were so done with any type of like masking or, physical distancing or being careful about schools or whatever it was. We were so done with it that, from a political standpoint, it seems that Biden had to say like, well, we're done.
Yeah.
And more people died because of our behavior rather than like our, a question of our immunity at that point.
So, but one of the big things that happened is that the vaccines got politicized and they didn't need to be. I mean, arguably the great accomplishment of the Trump administration during 2020 was Operation Warp Speed, where they got rid of a lot of the regulatory hurdles that normally block the rollout of new vaccines. And that worked. And the vaccine, like Trump could have claimed credit for the vaccine. Like he could have called the two vaccines the Ivana and the Ivanka vaccine, right? And like named them after himself. We could have had Trump masks everywhere. Like he could have handled this differently. But you might remember this. What happens is that Trump tries to get the FDA to approve the vaccine earlier than it was ready to, because he wants it rolling out during the election, right? He wants the vaccine to help carry him to victory. The FDA isn't ready to do it. By the time the FDA approves the vaccine, Biden has already won the election. Now, Trump doesn't want Biden to get credit for the vaccine, so he refuses to aggressively back the vaccine, like his own thing. So now, so this fuels this right-wing skepticism about the vaccine. We would have had some of it anyway, but now we have this very partisan rollout. And you're right to say that deaths, continue to escalate and go up in 2021, 2022. There's all these new, variants of COVID-19 of the virus. But what is really notable is that in 2021, after the vaccine, the pattern shift. And now it's like the red states that start to have really high levels of mortality because people aren't taking vaccine. And you started by asking, is there any place worse off than the United States for the next pandemic? Well, the reality is yes. There's a lot of places that are worse off because, there's a lot of very poor countries that don't have any really strong health infrastructure, that don't have access to the vaccines. We shouldn't take for granted. We shouldn't take for granted just.
But are they worse than they were in addressing this one?
That's the question. Where we are, and I think that you nailed it. The tragedy in the United States is that we are in many ways worse off now than we were in 2019. We're less prepared after this experience than we were before, because we're in such a rush to push all of this stuff aside, and because basic public health has been politicized in a way that it hadn't been in a very long time. There's been an assault on, not just Fauci, right? Fauci is the figurehead for it, but an assault on the public health infrastructure that you would argue we need more than ever, right? We're speaking now, it's, May 2024, and there's concerns about a new bird flu. That could be circulating. Who knows what the next pathogen is going to be? And, arguably, this is the time for making historic investments in it. Again, the book ends on this place. I think it's incredibly dangerous, this right-wing attack on public health infrastructure. And it has, it has placed us in risk that we should be talking about. So the book is not just about the pandemic. There's other crises, that I raise, but clearly, you said this is once in a lifetime, Sam. I hope it's once in a lifetime.
Right. I knocked on.
You want to run the government, not assuming that, right? You want to be prepared.
In fact, I saw a story today that the efforts to track the bird flus in cows, because they're starting to see bird flu dead bird flu, I guess, in milk that has been tested was inhibited because farmers and red state health officials are refusing to help the feds track this stuff because they don't trust them.
By the way, in the beginning of 2020, late 2019, one reason why our American disease surveillance in China was not as strong as it would have been under a different president is because Trump, in his attack on public health and his attack on health agencies, he pulled epidemiological surveillance teams out of China,
out of Wuhan,
out of Wuhan specifically. Yes. So there's another scenario in which early detection allows for stronger containment, and the relationship between the U.S. and China on the ground in China means it's harder for China to tell whatever story it wants about the virus to the WHO. And I think what's so striking about this is, like, we can talk about it in terms of right and left, but to be honest, any other Republican president we've had in history would have done the same thing. They would have acted more like Scott Morrison. Like, Trump was such a renegade, was so rogue, so reckless in his management of science policy, health policy, international relations, and the rollout of America's pandemic response, that the damage is, in my view, incalculable. And I think we should think about this. You might not know this, Sam, but there's an election this year in November, and it just strikes me that this is the kind of thing that we want to be talking about. But Biden, unfortunately, is terrified of bringing it up. He's doesn't want to run on his COVID record, and so we're not really getting the accounting in public debates that we should be.
And I would just add to that any other Republican, I think, would have reacted very differently then. But I think that was an era where we learned that a Republican that is not fully really deeply invested in an assault on the administrative state is no longer a viable Republican candidate anymore, it seems to me. I mean, they all like to come in and destroy certain of their pet sort of agencies. But as a full-on project, I think that's been largely adopted by the mainstream Republican Party at this point. But putting that aside, let's talk a little bit about the essential workers thing, because this dynamic is also sort of fascinating. And there's a quality of the whole thing where, particularly when Biden gets into office and that first American Rescue Plan, it goes in and it does some amazing things for the country that were really, in many respects, unprecedented, that caught us up to our sort of European, similarly situated cohorts in terms of what they were offering on some level. I mean, not quite, but started to move towards that direction where we're providing a safety net for people and allowing people a certain thing. We reduce poverty dramatically. And there was a non-acknowledgement of that, and also sort of the flip side of the coin of what we didn't acknowledge about essential workers.
Yeah. Well, you're right about the policy thing. It took a while in the U.S. compared to other countries, and there was a lot of uncertainty for workers about how they would come out, and even the rollout of some of these policies was shaky, right? So we all remember the Cheesecake Factory was able to get huge amounts of money for business relief, but a lot of small business owners were not. Ironic, given the way the Republican Party champions itself as the hero of the small business owner, but that's obviously not how it played out. And so that was shaky. But look, there were amazing things that happened in terms of our social policies during COVID, including especially, I think, the Child Poverty Reduction Act, right? We set record numbers of American children were lifted out of poverty, and it looked like those things might be durable. And one of the tragedies of this last couple of years is that it's like we offered a hand and pointed towards a better world, and then we pulled it away and said, no, you're on your own now. And I think, lots of Americans, left and right, really feel abandoned these days. They feel like the government has left us to take care of ourselves in ways we can't do. But nobody feels more abandoned than essential workers. And I think it's so important to go back to this conversation, because one of the things we've forgotten is that at a moment where it looked like the bottom had fallen out and we didn't know if we were going to survive and what would happen to our parents and our children and our jobs, the government said everybody needs to stay home as much as you possibly can, with one exception: the people whose labor matters the most for the functioning of our society and economy. Those people, we're going to call them essential workers, and we're going to ask them to put themselves out in the world. And, I live in New York City, so do you. So we all know the essential workers. They're the bankers, they're the lawyers, right? They're the NICs, except for, of course, they're not the essential workers. And what the crisis reveals is that we can do fine without those people, running the show. What we need are clerks. What we need are delivery people. We need our people running the transit system. We need hospital workers, right? We need janitors, right? We need people to prepare food. We need meat packers. We need agricultural laborers. Those are the essential workers. And when you have a concept like essential worker and you say it out loud, it seems like it comes with this moral commitment. Like, now that we call you essential, we're going to make sure that you have access to the best healthcare and PPE. And maybe there'll be some special compensation for you. And maybe we will have, I don't know, we'll say thank you. It's an honor. And instead, what happened is we came up with this idea, and those people who were called essential workers were basically deemed expendable. They became much more likely to contract COVID. They became much more likely to bring COVID home with them to their spouses, to their children, to everybody who shared a household with them. They were sicker, they died more. And when it ended, instead of honoring them, instead of paying them, instead of thanking them, we just pretended like it didn't happen. It's like we walked to the edge of this moral precipice. We're about to do something great, right? Including all of the policy changes that could have been durable. And then we said, nah, forget it. Never mind. Let's go back to business as usual. And now, here we are with a lot of Americans. And again, I fear on both sides of the political spectrum, a lot of Americans feeling angry and discarded. And I don't know, Emma, maybe nihilistic again. That's the thing I'm worried about in 2024, maybe nihilistic.
Yeah, I think that it's just also it's deeply connected to what Sam is saying about the dismantling of the administrative state, right? I mean, and I think Trump is unique in that way, where the example that you reminded me of him essentially having states clamor and bid for the PPE in the pandemic is this absolutely hostile relationship to what government should be.
It's Mad Max.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right. It's like Lord of the Flies or whatever, and it's selling it to the highest bidder and who can cozy up to the king, as you referred to it. Those kinds of politics are now really what the right embodies, in a way that I think is particularly unique to this time, and was so laid bare in the pandemic.
There's a couple. I want to just touch in a moment on just getting an analysis of where we are now, and in what the implications of what we had been through are impacting, where we go forward in the context of the election, but also in terms of the policies. But all of these things that we've been talking about, like the abandonment of the essential workers, or essentially sort of the odd branding of essential workers. You're essential, but really more like what we mean is you're sort of indentured. And this notion of we cut poverty for children by 35, 40%.
Yeah.
And then just as a society decided that was an interesting experiment. The amount of attention that the media has given these dynamics is fascinating to me, because you would think if somebody had said at any other time, hey, we just ran an experiment for 12 months and cut child poverty by 40% with a super easy, straightforward policy of just giving people $300 per kid under a certain, you would think that would be revolutionary.
Yeah.
And in terms of whoa, what have we discovered here? And there was virtual silence, it seems to me, across the media and within society, no discussion of this whatsoever.
So let's name it. I mean, it was the right that killed those policies. I mean, it was the Republican Party that was organized that would not let those policies continue. There's no question about that. Obviously, we have Manchin and Sinema who really devastated the kind of expansion of the big infrastructure, build up programs that the Biden administration had proposed, which would have generated jobs. But it was just clearly the right that said no to continuing the Child Poverty Reduction Act and ending some of those basic welfare protections that we put in place. So I think it's important to name that because, again, Americans have to vote.
Right now, there's a bill that is going to die in the Senate that would go, is like a quarter measure of that, but
Yep.
the Republicans won't pass it because they want bigger corporate tax cuts. They